On my wedding day, my sister handed me a beautifully carved gift box. My Navy SEAL commander husband grabbed my wrist and said, "Do not touch it." I asked him what was wrong. He stared at my sister, his voice like ice, and said, "You brought a threat into my home." Instantly, 6 of his SEAL team guests stood up from their tables. My sister's smug smirk turned to absolute fear. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to defend yourself against the people who were supposed to protect you. My name is Nia, and I am 30 years old. Growing up in the affluent circles of Atlanta, image was everything. My parents, Pastor Thomas and First Lady Vivian, ran one of the largest megachurches in the city. To the congregation, we were the perfect family. Behind closed doors, I was the constant disappointment, the girl who refused to pledge the right sorority, the one who dropped out of law school to write code. My sister Chloe, however, was the golden child. She was the Ivy League graduate, the socialite queen of Atlanta, and the perfect daughter. My wedding to Marcus was supposed to be my sanctuary away from all that toxicity. Marcus was a 35-year-old Navy SEAL commander. He was calm, brilliantly sharp, and fiercely protective of me. We had paid for the entire lavish reception at a high-end penthouse venue overlooking the Atlanta skyline ourselves, specifically so my parents could not hold the finances over my head. But even in a room filled with our closest friends, and Marcus's military brothers, my family found a way to make it about them. The jazz band had just finished playing our first dance song. The room was buzzing with laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. Then Chloe tapped her manicured fingernail against her crystal flute. She stepped up to the microphone, her custom silk gown shimmering under the chandelier lights. She offered a tearful, Oscar-worthy speech about sisterhood and family bonds. Then she walked over to our sweetheart table holding a small, intricately carved mahogany box. "Nia," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, "this is a family heirloom from Grandma. I know she would have wanted you to have it today. Please open it." I smiled politely, reaching out to take the box. But before my fingers could even brush the polished wood, Marcus clamped his hand around my wrist. His grip was gentle but immovable. "Do not touch it," he commanded softly. I looked at him confused. "Marcus, it is just a box from my grandmother." Marcus did not look at me. His piercing gaze was locked dead on Chloe. The easygoing groom from 5 minutes ago was gone, replaced by the tactical commander who had survived countless deployments. He stood up, his towering frame casting a shadow over my sister. "You brought a threat into my home." His voice cut through the lingering music, cold and absolute. Chloe took a step back, her perfect smile faltering. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" "It is a family heirloom. Stop being so dramatic." Marcus did not argue. He simply gave a subtle nod across the room. Instantly, 6 men in tailored suits stood up in perfect unison. They were Marcus's closest friends, all active-duty SEALs. The casual wedding atmosphere vanished in a heartbeat. The jazz band stopped playing. The guests fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Preston, Chloe's husband, suddenly looked very pale. Preston was a 36-year-old finance executive, a white man my parents absolutely adored because he managed the church pension fund and supposedly brought our family closer to the elite circles of the city. He cleared his throat loudly, tugging at his collar. "This is ridiculous," Preston stammered, his eyes darting toward the main exit. "Chloe, let us go. I need to make a call anyway." Preston turned and took a fast step toward the heavy oak doors, but he never made it. 2 of Marcus's men moved with terrifying speed. Before anyone could blink, they intercepted. Preston grabbed him by the shoulders and slammed him face down onto the nearest dining table. Crystal glasses shattered into 1,000 pieces. Plates clattered to the floor. Preston shouted in shock, his face pressed hard against the white tablecloth while a highly trained soldier pinned his arms behind his back. "What are you doing to my husband?" Chloe shrieked, dropping the mahogany box onto our table and backing away in sheer panic. My mother, Vivian, rushed forward in her extravagant church hat, her face twisted in rage. "Nia," she screamed at the top of her lungs. Are you out of your mind? You let your violent husband assault your brother-in-law at your own wedding? You are ruining your sister's moment, just like you always do. Is this like the time you hacked the university system to frame Chloe for plagiarism? I stood up from my chair, my wedding dress rustling heavily around my legs. The audacity of her bringing that up right now fueled a fire in my chest. I did not hack the system to frame her mom, I yelled back, my voice echoing off the glass walls. I hacked the system to retrieve the valedictorian essay she stole straight from my hard drive to submit under her own name. You knew she was a fraud then, and you are protecting a fraud now. My father. Pastor Thomas marched to the front, his face flushed with righteous indignation. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Marcus. Let him go this instant. Preston is a respected financial advisor. He manages the entire retirement fund for my church. He is a man of God and a man of high society. I have political connections in this city, Marcus. I will make a few phone calls and have you stripped of your military rank by tomorrow morning. Marcus ignored the threats completely. He calmly reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a pair of black tactical gloves. He slipped them on, flexing his fingers, before reaching for the mahogany box Chloe had left on the table. A man of God does not bring a digital bomb to a wedding, Marcus said evenly. He popped the brass latch and opened the lid. There was no vintage jewelry inside. There was no heartfelt note from my late grandmother. Marcus carefully lifted the false velvet bottom of the box. Sitting in the hidden compartment was a highly modified military-grade flash drive wired to a micro GPS tracker with a blinking red light. The entire room gasped. My mother froze her mouth, hanging open. My father lowered his pointing finger, staring at the blinking red light, as if it were a venomous snake. What is that? I asked, stepping closer to Marcus. As the chief executive officer of a private cybersecurity intelligence firm, I knew a malicious device when I saw one. But seeing it disguised as a wedding gift from my own sister made my blood run cold. Before Marcus could answer, the heavy double doors of the penthouse venue burst open. The flashing blue and red lights from the street below reflected in the glass windows. A team of federal agents strode into the room, their badges flashing under the chandeliers. The lead agent walked straight past my horrified parents and stopped right in front of the table where Preston was still pinned down. Preston stared up at the agent, his face sweating profusely. The agent looked at the flash drive in Marcus's gloved hand, then looked down at Preston. We have been tracking that signature for weeks, the agent said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. That drive contains malicious code designed to route illegal wire transfers and a fabricated dossier meant to frame Commander Marcus for international money laundering. Preston, you are under arrest. My mother let out a loud, dramatic wail. She turned to me, her face completely unhinged, and delivered a stinging slap across my cheek. You set him up! She screamed, tears of rage ruining her perfect makeup. You set up your own brother-in-law to humiliate this family. You have always been a stain on our legacy. I disown you. You are no longer my daughter. Marcus immediately stepped between us, shielding me from her. He gently wiped a drop of blood from the corner of my mouth where her ring had caught my lip. He looked down at me, his eyes full of a dangerous protective fire. He leaned in and whispered so only I could hear. This is just the beginning. I secured the perimeter, but I am going to let you finish the war. I stared into Marcus's eyes and drew a deep, steadying breath. The stinging heat on my cheek from my mother's hand was fading, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. For 30 years I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace in the Thomas family. I had allowed myself to be painted as the rebellious outcast so my parents could maintain their flawless megachurch facade. But tonight the curtain was falling. I turned away from Marcus and looked at the crowd. Hundreds of Atlanta's most elite socialites, politicians, and church elders were staring at us in absolute shock. The silence in the penthouse was deafening, broken only by the sound of the federal agent reciting Preston his Miranda rights and the metallic click of handcuffs snapping around his wrists. My mother, Vivian, was hyperventilating. Her carefully pinned hair was disheveled, and her silk dress trembled with each jagged breath she took. She could not process the sight of her perfect son-in-law being dragged up from the shattered crystal on the dining table. Unable to accept the truth, she did what she had always done. She blamed me. "Nia, what kind of sick, crazy stunt are you pulling to ruin your sister's moment?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her eyes wild. "You fabricated this entire thing. You planted that device to make Preston look like a criminal because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of Chloe. This is exactly like the time you hacked the university system to frame your own sister for plagiarism." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Chloe, who was cowering behind my father, suddenly stood up straighter, adopting her practiced victim expression. She let out a soft, calculated sob, pressing her hands to her face. I looked at my sister and then back at my mother. The sheer audacity of her bringing up the university incident at my wedding was astounding, but I was not the scared 20-year-old girl they had bullied into submission a decade ago. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. The heavy silk of my wedding gown swept across the marble floor. "I did not hack the university system to frame her, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm, but projecting clearly across the silent room. "I hacked the system to retrieve the original drafts of my valedictorian essay. The essay she stole straight from my hard drive to submit under her own name so she could secure her Ivy League acceptance." Chloe's fake tears stopped instantly, her face drained of all color. "You knew she was a fraud then, and you are protecting a fraud now." I continued, refusing to break eye contact with my mother. "You and Dad knew exactly what she did. But because she was the golden child, the one destined for the right sorority and the right society marriage, you forced me to take the blame. You told everyone I was having a mental breakdown. You sacrificed my reputation to protect her stolen crown." "Lies," my mother sputtered, stepping back as if physically struck by the truth. "You are a bitter liar. I am a cybersecurity expert," I corrected her coldly. "I leave digital footprints for a living. I still have the timestamps, the keystroke logs, and the original metadata proving she copied my work word for word. I kept it all, just like I know exactly what is sitting inside that mahogany box right now." I walked over to the sweetheart table where Marcus stood guarding the open wooden box. I pointed to the false velvet bottom. The federal agents holding Preston paused, turning their attention to the device. "Tell them what it is, Marcus," I said. Marcus picked up the flash drive with his gloved hand, holding it up for the room to see. The small red light blinked rhythmically, casting an eerie glow. Underneath the velvet lining of this so-called family heirloom is a highly modified military-grade USB drive, he announced, his voice resonating with absolute authority. Attached to it is a micro GPS tracker and a remote detonator protocol. If Nia had plugged this into her personal laptop, as I am sure Chloe would have suggested later tonight, it would have bypassed her company's firewalls. It was designed to plant a virus in the Aegis cybersecurity network and download classified defense contracts my team is currently securing. The room erupted into chaotic murmurs. The implications were staggering. This was not just a white-collar financial crime, this was corporate espionage and an attack on a military commander. Chloe began shaking her head, frantically backing away from the table. I did not know she stammered, her voice pitching into a panic. "Preston gave me the box. He told me it was a gift. He said it was a surprise." Preston, currently being hauled toward the exit by two agents, shot his wife a look of pure venom. "You greedy coward," he spat, struggling against the federal agent's grip. "You signed off on every single offshore account, Chloe. Do not play the innocent victim now." My father, Pastor Thomas, could no longer contain his fury. The patriarch of the family stepped forward, his face a mask of righteous indignation. He was a man used to controlling thousands of parishioners from his pulpit every Sunday, and he attempted to use that same booming, authoritative voice now. "That is enough!" he roared, silencing the crowd. He marched toward Marcus, his chest puffed out in a pathetic display of intimidation. "You listen to me, Commander. I do not care what kind of fancy tactical gear you wear or what wild accusations you are throwing around. Preston is a reputable pension fund manager. He handles the retirement accounts for my entire congregation. He is a man of God, and he would never stoop to such treacherous behavior. Marcus did not flinch. He stood perfectly still, looking down at my father, with the cold, detached assessment of a predator evaluating a very small, very loud threat. My father thrust his finger directly into Marcus's chest. "I have powerful connections in this city," he threatened, his voice trembling with rage. "I dine with senators. I play golf with federal judges. You come into my family and orchestrate this circus to ruin our good name. I will personally make a few phone calls tonight. I will have your military rank stripped from you before sunrise. You will be court-martialed for this outrage." I stepped up beside my husband, linking my arm through his. "You can call whoever you want, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "But your political friends cannot save you from treason." My father glared at me, his eyes filled with a disgust that had haunted my entire childhood. "You are no daughter of mine," he sneered. Before I could respond, a new sound pierced the heavy atmosphere of the penthouse. It started as a distant wail echoing through the glass walls from the city streets below. Within seconds, the wail multiplied, growing louder and more aggressive than the standard police sirens that had accompanied the first wave of agents. It was a harsh grating alarm that signaled a high-level tactical response. The federal agents holding Preston exchanged sharp, tactical glances. The lead agent pressed a hand to his earpiece, his expression hardening. Downstairs, the heavy glass doors of the building lobby must have been breached because we could hear the thunderous sound of heavy boots echoing up the stairwells and elevator shafts. The jazz band members scrambled to get out of the way. The guests backed up against the walls, clutching their champagne glasses in absolute terror. The penthouse doors violently swung open, hitting the wall with a deafening crash. A dozen heavily armed operatives poured into the room dressed in full tactical gear with automatic weapons drawn and secured to their chests. Emblazoned across their tactical vests in bold yellow letters was the acronym NCIS. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service had arrived. The lead NCIS agent, a tall, broad-shouldered woman with steel-gray eyes, swept into the room. She bypassed the local federal agents completely and marched straight toward our table. She locked eyes with Marcus, offering a crisp, brief nod before turning her attention to the mahogany box and the blinking red drive in his gloved hand. "Commander," she said, her voice sharp and commanding, "we intercepted the distress beacon from the unauthorized military hardware. We are taking custody of the device and the suspects immediately." She turned her piercing gaze toward Preston, who was now trembling uncontrollably, and then she looked directly at Chloe. My sister let out a terrified squeak and tried to hide behind my mother. "Secure the perimeter!" The NCIS agent barked to her team, pointing at the exits. "Nobody leaves this room until we have seized all digital assets and identified every individual involved in the attempted breach of secure naval networks." The war had officially begun, and as I looked at the pale, terrified faces of my parents and my sister, I knew they were finally realizing that their empire of lies was burning to the ground. The lead NCIS agent, Special Agent Vance, did not waste a single second. She snapped her fingers, and a tactical tech specialist moved forward, dropping a heavy, reinforced briefcase onto the nearest cocktail table. He flipped the latches open, revealing a portable military-grade diagnostic terminal. The guests held their collective breath. My father's jaw was ticking so hard I thought the bone might shatter. Chloe was shivering, clinging to my mother's arm like a terrified child, her eyes darting frantically toward the exit. The tech specialist extracted the modified flash drive from the mahogany box using a pair of anti-static tweezers. He plugged it into a heavily shielded quarantine port on his terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision. Lines of green code reflected in the lenses of his glasses as the room waited in absolute suffocating silence. "Payload confirmed, boss," the tech agent announced, his voice carrying clearly through the penthouse. "It is a highly aggressive Trojan worm. The architecture is explicitly designed to infiltrate secure military financial networks. But it is not just a data miner. It is a framing device. The code is preloaded with offshore routing numbers. If this had been activated on Commander Marcus's home network, It would have initiated automated wire transfers from illicit accounts directly into his personal military credit union. He paused, looking up at Agent Vance, his expression grim. It would have fabricated a seamless paper trail, making it look like the commander has been laundering cartel money for the last 5 years. It is a digital assassination. I stared at Preston. The perfectly groomed financial advisor, the man my parents paraded around the country club as the gold standard of success, was nothing but a desperate coward. He was trying to save his own skin by sending my husband to federal prison for treason. Agent Vance turned her steely gaze toward him. Preston Sterling, you are under arrest for attempted cyberterrorism, federal wire fraud, and conspiracy to frame a United States military officer. You have the right to remain silent. She nodded to the federal agents holding him. Get him out of here. They yanked Preston to his feet. He thrashed against their grip, his expensive tuxedo jacket ripping at the shoulder seam. I was forced, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips as panic completely consumed him. I owed money. I had no choice. Chloe knew. She knew about the debts. She signed the offshore authorization papers. Chloe shrieked, pressing her hands over her ears as if she could physically block out his confession. Liar! She wailed, her voice hitting a glass-shattering pitch. He is lying to save himself, Mom. Dad, tell them he is lying. My father stepped forward, trying to use his physical bulk to block the federal agents from dragging Preston toward the main elevators. This is a misunderstanding. You cannot do this without a proper warrant. You have no jurisdiction here. Agent Vance simply reached into her jacket and held up a folded piece of paper, her expression unyielding. We have a federal warrant signed by a judge 2 hours ago, Pastor Thomas. Step aside or you will be arrested for obstructing a federal investigation. My father, a man who had never been told no in his entire adult life, deflated instantly. He stepped back, his face a mask of profound shock and utter humiliation. The elevator doors chimed open, and the agents shoved Preston inside. As the heavy steel doors slid shut, sealing Preston's fate, the reality of the situation crashed down on my family. Their perfect image, their pristine public reputation, the empire they had built on appearances, was gone. And instead of looking at the criminals they had nurtured, my mother turned slowly toward me. Her eyes were black with a hatred so deep it took my breath away. She did not see a daughter whose life had just been threatened. She saw the person who had pulled back the curtain on her flawless stage play. She lunged forward, her hands curling into claws. Before Marcus could intercept her, she grabbed the delicate lace of my wedding dress, ripping the fabric violently near my collarbone. You did this, she screamed, her voice tearing through the penthouse, ugly and raw. You set him up. You used your computer tricks to plant that virus and frame your own brother-in-law. You could not stand seeing Chloe happy. You could not stand that she married a successful, prominent man while you were just a college dropout playing on the internet. I shoved her hands off me, standing my ground despite the trembling in my legs. He just confessed to federal agents, Mom, I said, my voice rising to match hers. He admitted to the debts. He tried to send my husband to federal prison to cover his own tracks. Open your eyes. Your perfect son-in-law is a criminal, and your perfect daughter is his accomplice. My mother raised her hand and struck me. It was not the reactive slap from earlier. It was a calculated, vicious blow to my cheek that echoed like a gunshot across the room. You are poison, she hissed, her face inches from mine, her breath hot and furious. You have always been a dark cloud over this family. You purposely brought those agents here to ruin our family legacy, to ruin your sister's reputation in front of our congregation. You are a disgrace to the Thomas name. I am done with you. I disown you. As of this moment, you are dead to me. She turned to my father, grabbing his arm with frantic energy. Thomas, we are leaving. We need to call our lawyers immediately. We need to save Preston and protect Chloe from this lunatic. My father gave me one last look of absolute chilling disgust. He did not say a single word in my defense. He did not ask if I was okay. He simply wrapped his arm around a hysterically sobbing Chloe and guided her toward the secondary elevators. My mother followed right behind them, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. They did not look back. Not once. On my wedding day, my entire family walked out the door to protect a felon, leaving me standing alone in a torn white dress amidst a room full of staring guests. The remaining attendees, the elite socialites and church elders who had kissed my cheek an hour ago, were practically sprinting for the exits. The whispers were deafening, buzzing around me like angry hornets. Did you hear what she did? She framed her own family. The Thomas family is ruined. I cannot believe we came to this. Within 10 minutes, the lavish penthouse venue was completely empty, save for Marcus, his SEAL team, and the catering staff nervously hovering in the kitchen shadows. I stood frozen, staring at the empty elevator doors. My cheek throbbed violently where my mother's heavy diamond ring had struck me, but I refused to shed a single tear. The grief I should have felt was completely consumed by an icy, absolute rage. The last invisible string tying me to my childhood, seeking their approval, wanting their love, had just been severed. Marcus stepped up behind me. He wrapped his large, warm hands around my bare arms, pulling my back flush against his solid chest. He reached up his thumb, gently tracing the angry red mark on my cheek. They made their choice, he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble in the quiet room. They chose the illusion over you. I leaned into his touch, my hands resting over his. They think they can spin this, I whispered, my voice hard and hollow. They think my father's political money and my mother's social connections will make this go away. They think they can blame me in front of the congregation and walk away unscathed. They think I am still the quiet girl who takes the fall. Marcus turned me around, looking down into my eyes with that same fierce, tactical intensity that made him a legend in the teams. He bent down and effortlessly lifted me into his arms, carrying me bridal style away from the shattered glass and ruined tables. Then we burned the illusion to the ground, he said, his jaw set with lethal determination. The defense phase is over, Naya. I'm going to let you finish this war yourself. The morning sun had barely crested the Atlanta skyline 24 hours later when the retaliation struck. I was standing in my glass-walled office at Aegis Cyber, staring out at the city, when Marcus walked in and silently handed me a tablet. The screen displayed the live video feed of The Word and Truth, the largest and most influential gospel radio morning show in the entire Southeast. There sat my parents and Chloe arranged in a perfect high-definition tableau of righteous suffering. Our hearts are incredibly heavy this morning, Pastor Thomas boomed into the studio microphone. His voice dripped with the exact cadence of pastoral sorrow he used to extract millions in donations from his congregation. We are coming to you today, not as leaders of the church, but as grieving parents. We ask for your urgent prayers for our youngest daughter, Nia. She is severely unwell. Yesterday, she suffered a complete, terrifying mental break. The camera cut to my mother. Vivian clutched a lace handkerchief, perfectly dabbing at eyes that were completely dry. Nia has always harbored a deep, tragic jealousy of her sister Chloe. She whimpered, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. Chloe has a beautiful Christian marriage. Nia's resentment drove her to manipulate her new husband, a man trained in military warfare, to launch a terroristic, fabricated attack on our beloved son-in-law Preston right at the wedding reception. Preston is an innocent man of God, framed by a woman desperately in need of psychiatric intervention. Chloe leaned toward the microphone, her face the absolute picture of a forgiving saint. I forgive her, Chloe sniffled, wiping away a single perfectly timed tear. I just want my sister to get the psychological help she desperately needs. My husband is sitting in a federal holding cell because my sister could not handle her own insecurities. We are praying for her soul. I set the tablet face down on my desk. They were not just spinning a narrative, they were weaponizing their massive religious platform to completely obliterate my credibility. They were branding me a jealous, hysterical woman who had weaponized a Navy SEAL to destroy a good Christian finance manager. Within minutes, my phone began vibrating so violently it nearly danced off the edge of the desk. The megachurch network was a powerful, ruthless machine, and my father had just flipped the execution switch. My company's social media feeds were exploding with vitriol. The African American community in Atlanta, a circle my parents held in an iron grip, turned on me instantly. Thousands of comments poured in across every platform. Prayers for Pastor Thomas. So tragic to see a daughter fall to the devil. Boycott, Aegis Cyber, do not trust a crazy vindictive woman with your personal data. Then came the hit I could not ignore. The heavy glass doors of my office swung open. My chief operating officer David walked in, his face ash gray. He did not even bother saying good morning. Southern Horizon Healthcare just pulled out, David said, his voice completely flat. I felt a sharp cold knot form in my stomach. Southern Horizon was our anchor client. They represented 40% of Aegis Cyber's annual revenue. Their board of directors just called me personally. David continued, running a hand over his face. They cannot risk their hospital data infrastructure being tied to a federal framing scandal. They invoked the morality and public relations clause in our contract to terminate the agreement immediately. We are bleeding out, Nia. 3 other mid-size corporate clients sent cancellation notices to my inbox while I was walking down the hallway. The radio broadcast is everywhere. My parents knew exactly what they were doing. They knew Aegis Cyber was my pride, my independence, and my fortress. They thought they could starve me out by destroying my corporate reputation, suffocating my revenue streams until I was forced to crawl back to them on my knees. They expected me to publicly apologize, retract the evidence against Preston, and beg for their forgiveness to save my livelihood. I did not panic. I am a cybersecurity architect. When the primary firewall breaches, you isolate the compromised sectors, lock down your assets, and rely on your secure backups. Let them cancel, I told David, my voice steady and devoid of any emotion. Route all remaining active clients to our secondary servers and initiate a media blackout for the company. Do not issue any statements. I am going to inject an emergency capital reserve into our payroll accounts to cover the operational losses for the next 6 months. We will weather this storm. David nodded, looking slightly relieved by my calm demeanor, and hurried out of the office to manage the bleeding. I turned to my dual monitor setup and opened my encrypted personal financial portal. When my grandmother passed away, she saw right through my parents' toxic favoritism. She had bypassed my father entirely and left a $2 million trust fund exclusively in my name. It was completely separate from the church, separate from my parents' empire, and entirely under my control. It was my ultimate safety net, my war chest. I plugged in my security key and rapidly typed in my dual authentication credentials, preparing to wire emergency funds directly into my company's operating account. The screen refreshed. A loading icon spun for 2 agonizing seconds. Then a harsh, bright red banner flashed across the center of the monitor. Access denied. Account frozen. By court order. I stared at the flashing red letters on my monitor. Access denied. Account frozen by court order. The words blurred together as a cold wave of realization washed over me. This was my grandmother's trust. $2 million of clean, untainted money. It was legally impenetrable, heavily fortified by independent financial advisors, or so I had thought. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, bypassing the standard banking user interface to access the back-end routing metadata. I needed to know exactly how a rock-solid trust had been breached in less than 24 hours. As the chief executive officer of a cybersecurity firm, I knew that every digital lock had a physical key, and in Atlanta, the heaviest keys were forged in the back rooms of my father's megachurch. It took me exactly 4 minutes to trace the legal filing. The document staring back at me was an emergency ex parte order. It was signed by Judge Harrison Miller. The name sent a jolt of pure disgust through my system. Judge Miller was not just a prominent figure in the local judiciary. He sat on the board of elders at my father's church. He regularly enjoyed prime seating at Sunday services and attended private lavish dinners funded by church tithes. The grounds for the freeze made my blood run absolutely cold. Temporary mental incapacitation. My father had taken the narrative from that morning's gospel radio broadcast, the vicious lie about my supposed psychotic break at the wedding, and weaponized it. He had used his vast political leverage and spiritual authority to convince a judge behind closed doors that I was in immediate danger to myself and my financial assets. With a single stroke of a pen, Judge Miller had granted my father emergency conservatorship over my accounts. They were effectively choking out my company's lifeline and trapping me financially. They wanted me destitute, unable to pay my employees, and unable to fight back. My cell phone began to vibrate violently against the glass surface of my desk. The caller ID flashed Chloe's name. For a moment, I just watched it buzz. They expected me to be hysterical. They expected me to answer the phone, weeping, begging for mercy, pleading for them to release my funds so I could save my life's work. I reached out and tapped the speaker button. Chloe's voice floated through the sterile office, dripping with a sugary, toxic venom that I had endured my entire life. "Did you really think a law school dropout who types code for a living could beat this family?" She laughed, a sharp, grating sound that echoed off the glass walls. "You have always been so utterly delusional, Naya. Dad plays golf with the highest judges in this city. You do not stand a chance against us." I leaned back in my leather chair, keeping my breathing perfectly even. "Why are you calling Chloe?" I asked, my voice devoid of the panic she was so desperately hoping to hear. "I just wanted to check on our mentally unstable sister." She mocked, her tone hardening into something ugly and vindictive. "Did you actually forget who you were dealing with? Did you think you could just humiliate us in front of the entire elite society of Atlanta and face zero consequences? You have always been a slow learner. Did you forget what happened when you were hospitalized with pneumonia during your sophomore year?" The memory hit me like a physical strike to the chest. I was 19, burning with a severe fever, struggling to breathe in a sterile hospital room while intravenous fluids dripped into my arm. My parents had promised to stay with me. Instead, they left me entirely alone for 3 days to attend Chloe's sorority debut. I remembered waking up to the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors, completely isolated, while scrolling through social media to see my mother and father beaming proudly next to Chloe in a custom silk gown. "Mom and Dad left you alone in that hospital bed because I mattered," Chloe sneered, pulling the memory out of the dark just to twist the knife. "My image mattered. The family brand mattered. You were just a pathetic inconvenience then, and you are just a pathetic inconvenience now. We will always choose the legacy over you. We will always choose my happiness over your survival." "You are not going to win this," I told her, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. "Your husband is sitting in a federal holding cell facing charges of corporate espionage and treason. You cannot pray away a federal indictment, Chloe." Chloe's laugh returned, louder and more triumphant than before. "Oh, Nia, you really are slow today. Do you genuinely think we are going to let Preston rot in a cell?" His bail was set at $1.5 million this morning. Do you want to guess where we got the collateral? The sheer audacity of her words paralyzed me for a fraction of a second. I looked back at my computer monitor at the bright red banner declaring my grandmother's trust frozen. "That is right," Chloe continued, basking in my silence. "We just wired the funds from your little secret trust account. Thanks to Dad's emergency conservatorship, your money is paying for Preston's federal bail and his elite defense team. We are using your grandmother's gift to save my husband. We are going to bleed your accounts dry, shut down your little cyber company, and drag your name through the mud until nobody in this industry will even look at you. And when you have absolutely nothing left, when you are sleeping on the street, maybe we will let you stand in front of the congregation and beg for our forgiveness." She waited for me to break. She waited for the tears, the screaming, the desperate pleas. But the girl who used to cry in the shadow of her golden sister was dead. My parents had killed her a long time ago, and Chloe had just buried the remains. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached out and tapped the end call button, cutting off her triumphant laughter mid-breath. The silence in my office was heavy, charged with an electric tension. I turned my chair around. Marcus was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was no longer the sharply dressed groom in a custom tuxedo. He was dressed in dark, functional tactical clothing. His broad shoulders blocked out the afternoon sun, and his face was a mask of terrifying, lethal focus. The calm, gentle man who held me last night was entirely submerged beneath the surface of a seasoned military commander preparing for an active siege. He smoothly slid a fresh magazine into his Glock 19. The sharp metallic click of the weapon echoed loudly in the quiet room. He racked the slide with brutal efficiency, his piercing blue eyes locking onto mine with a silent, unwavering promise of absolute destruction. He did not need to ask what Chloe had said. He could read the Cold War written across my face. I stood up from my desk, smoothing the front of my blazer. I had played by the rules for too long. I had tried to build my own life quietly, respectfully, keeping my head down to avoid the wrath of the Thomas family empire. But they had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. They had stolen my grandmother's legacy, the only pure thing I had left of my childhood, to fund a traitor who tried to destroy my husband. My father wanted to play games with digital locks and corrupt judges. He had no idea what kind of monster he had just unchained. Marcus. I said, my voice steady, ringing with an icy clarity that sent a shiver down my own spine. It is time to use the highest level of access. I turned my leather chair back toward my command station. The glaring red banner of my frozen trust fund still pulsed on the center screen, a mocking reminder of my father's overreach. I closed the window with a sharp keystroke. My father genuinely believed that starving me of my financial resources would paralyze me into submission. He operated under the archaic assumption that money was the ultimate power. He forgot that in the modern world, information is the only currency that truly matters, and I owned the bank. I launched a completely black, encrypted terminal. The room fell silent save for the rapid, rhythmic clatter of my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. Marcus did not interrupt. He simply moved to the reinforced glass door of my office, scanning the city streets far below while tapping his earpiece to coordinate with his private security detail. He was locking down the physical perimeter. I was going to tear down the digital one. I am initiating Operation Glasshouse, I told David, my chief operating officer, who had just rushed back into the room. David froze, his eyes widening behind his wire-rimmed glasses. You are going inside the church mainframe, Nia. If they catch you bypassing their security, they will have you arrested for federal cyber intrusion. Your father already has a judge in his pocket. They have to catch me first, I replied, never taking my eyes off the cascading lines of code. And they will not. I built their original network architecture from the ground up when I was a teenager. My father thought the Lord protected his servers, but it was just my proprietary firewalls. I left a ghost directory buried deep in the foundational code a decade ago. It is invisible to their current IT team, and it gives me unrestricted, omnipotent access to every single byte of data flowing through the Atlanta megachurch network. I routed my connection through a labyrinth of proxy servers, bouncing my signal from Tokyo to Geneva to Reykjavik, before finally slipping undetected through the back door of my father's digital empire. The screen blossomed into dozens of secure directories. I bypassed the outward-facing donation portals and the congregation databases. I did not care about the Sunday tithes. I dove straight into the core financial intranet, hunting for the specific server partition assigned to Preston Sterling. If Preston was desperate enough to plant a military-grade virus on a Navy SEAL, he was hiding something catastrophic. Chloe had just bailed him out using my money, thinking she had outsmarted me. But arrogance always leaves a trail. I cracked Preston's encrypted pension management files. The sheer volume of data flooded my monitors, scrolling at a dizzying speed. I ran a rapid anomaly detection algorithm, commanding the software to flag any irregular routing protocols, phantom accounts, or unsanctioned offshore wire transfers. For 3 minutes, the terminal processed the financial history of the largest megachurch in the Southeast. Then the algorithm pinged. A massive web of hidden spreadsheets opened across my screens. David walked up behind me, staring over my shoulder. He let out a low, horrified breath. "My God," he whispered. "Look at the zeros." I leaned closer to the monitors, my blood running ice cold as I deciphered the ledger. Preston had not just been embezzling a few $1,000s from the church's retirement accounts. That was petty theft. What I was looking at was a highly sophisticated, deeply entrenched global money laundering syndicate. Preston had been using the church's massive international charity projects as a front. The orphanage expansion in Haiti, the Clean Water Initiative in El Salvador, the Disaster Relief Fund in Honduras. On paper, they looked like beautiful tax-exempt Christian philanthropy. In reality, they were ghost operations, shell companies. I traced the routing numbers attached to the massive cash infusions supposedly funding these charities. The money was not coming from wealthy, benevolent church donors. It was being funneled through a complex network of holding companies registered in southern Florida and the Cayman Islands. I ran the routing signatures against Aegis Cyber's global threat database. The system immediately flagged the accounts with a critical red warning. The digital footprint matched a heavily monitored financial syndicate tied directly to a notorious, ruthlessly violent Miami drug cartel. Preston was not just a corrupt finance manager skimming off the top. He was a high-level launderer for international narcotics traffickers. He had been using my parents' untouchable tax-exempt megachurch as a massive washing machine for blood money. This explained everything. It explained the military-grade espionage device at my wedding. Preston must have owed the cartel a massive debt, or they had demanded he secure classified government defense contracts to wipe his slate clean. It explained why Preston had panicked and tried to run. It explained why his bail was set at $1.5 million. And Chloe had just used my frozen trust fund to put a cartel asset back on the streets. "I need to pull the FBI into this immediately," David said, reaching for his phone. "Nia, this is cartel money. We are out of our depth. If they find out you are inside their ledgers, they will send people to kill you." "Hold on," I commanded, raising a hand to stop him. "Something is wrong with the authorization logs." I highlighted a massive transfer of $4 million sent to a shell company in Miami just 3 days ago. A transaction of this magnitude within the church's financial network required dual-factor authentication. Preston could initiate the wire transfer, but the church's banking protocols dictated that someone else with executive clearance had to digitally co-sign and authorize the release of the funds. Preston could not move this money alone. Someone inside my family was helping him wash cartel cash. My heart hammered against my ribs. I assumed it was my father. Pastor Thomas was greedy, power-hungry, and obsessed with wealth. It made perfect sense that he was taking a cut of the cartel money to fund his lavish lifestyle and his private jets. Or perhaps it was my mother signing off on the transfers to maintain her elite socialite status. I initiated a decryption protocol on the secondary digital signatures attached to the cartel transfers. The progress bar inched across the screen, parsing through layers of encrypted security. "Come on," I muttered. My eyes locked on the monitor. "Show me who is holding the pen." The decryption software beeped. The encryption shattered, revealing the raw, unedited authentication logs. The secondary authorization name flashed on the screen in bright, undeniable green text. I stopped breathing. The cold, sharp clarity that had fueled my hack suddenly dissolved into absolute stomach-churning shock. It was not my father turning a blind eye to fill his church coffers. It was not my mother signing off to fund her diamond collection. I scrolled down the ledger, my eyes scanning dozens, hundreds of illegal wire transfers. Every single cartel transaction, every washed dollar, every fraudulent charity transfer had a second digital signature approving the release of the funds. The signature did not belong to Preston. It belonged to Chloe. My golden, perfect, supposedly innocent sister had not just been blissfully unaware of her husband's crimes. She was not a victim who had been dragged into a scandal. She was the co-signer. She was the executive authorization. Chloe was actively, willingly laundering millions of dollars for a Miami drug cartel. The radio broadcast from this morning echoed in my head. Chloe crying on the air, playing the victim, begging the city to pray for my soul while framing me as a jealous, hysterical woman. She had played everyone. She had played my parents, the congregation, and the federal agents. I stared at the screen, a new, far more dangerous fire igniting in my veins. Chloe thought she had won. She thought she had used my money to buy her freedom and bury me in the dirt. But she had just handed me the digital execution warrant for her entire life. I extracted the USB drive containing the decrypted ledgers, the offshore routing numbers, and Chloe's undeniable digital signatures. It was the smoking gun, the definitive proof that my sister was a high-level launderer for a Miami drug cartel. I slipped the drive into the inner pocket of my blazer. I had the evidence to destroy them, but the immediate reality outside the glass walls of Aegis Cyber was shifting into something far more dangerous than white-collar crime. 48 hours later, the illusion of safety completely evaporated. My father had leveraged his immense political capital and church funds to secure Preston's release. The cartel money they had been washing provided an endless pool of resources, and Preston walked out of federal holding on a massive bail. But Preston's freedom did not bring relief to my family. It brought the cartel's terrifying scrutiny right to our doorstep. The intimidation tactics began almost immediately. It started with the vehicles. Heavy, unmarked black SUVs with heavily tinted windows began circling our penthouse building. They operated with a blatant, arrogant predictability. They crawled past the lobby entrance, idling in the loading zones for hours. When I looked down from the balcony, I could see the distinct silhouettes of men sitting in the driver's seats watching our perimeter. Marcus immediately transitioned from a corporate CEO's husband back to a Tier 1 military operator. He blacked out our digital footprint, sweeping the penthouse for listening devices and securing all entry points. He called in active duty favors, pulling satellite feeds and running license plates, confirming what we both already knew. These were not federal agents monitoring a suspect. These were cartel foot soldiers running surveillance on a target. By the end of the week, the tension inside the penthouse was suffocating. I was pacing the hardwood floors, tracing the same path from the kitchen island to the living room window, feeling the walls closing in. I had spent my entire life being manipulated and controlled by my parents' toxic expectations, and I refused to let a cartel trap me in a gilded cage. "I am going to the grocery store," I announced on Friday evening, grabbing my keys from the granite counter. Marcus stepped into the hallway, his posture instantly rigid. His eyes darkened, assessing me with tactical precision. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice a low, immovable command. "We have delivery services. You do not leave this perimeter unless it is a secured transport to your office." I looked up at him, keeping my voice steady. "Marcus, if I stay locked in this box, they have already won. They want me paralyzed with fear. They want me too terrified to hand that USB drive over to the FBI. I am just going to the organic market 3 blocks away. I need 30 minutes of normal, mundane life before I lose my mind." He studied my face, seeing the sheer exhaustion and defiance radiating from my eyes. His jaw clenched tight, the muscle ticking in his cheek. He finally gave a sharp, reluctant nod. "Fine. But we do it my way." The upscale grocery store in Midtown was brightly lit and bustling with the Friday evening crowd. Soft jazz drifted from the overhead speakers, mingling with the hum of conversation and the squeak of shopping cart wheels. It was the absolute epitome of affluent suburban normalcy, a jarring contrast to the violent reality lurking at the edges of my life. Marcus did not walk beside me. He operated in the shadows, trailing exactly 12 paces behind, blending seamlessly into the environment. To the casual observer, he was just another shopper browsing the artisan cheeses. To me, he was a lethal shadow, a constant reassuring presence watching every single blind spot. I made my way to the fresh produce section, pulling a plastic bag from the dispenser and turning my attention to a vibrant display of Fuji apples. I picked one up, turning the polished red fruit in my hand. For a split second, I let myself breathe. I let the mundane reality of the task wash over me, pretending that I was just a regular woman planning a weekend dinner, completely untouched by mega-church scandals and cartel money laundering. Then the atmosphere shifted. It was a subtle, terrifying change. A sudden drop in the ambient temperature, a prickle of primal awareness at the base of my neck. The casual chatter of the shoppers around me seemed to fade into a muted, distorted hum. A man stepped into my peripheral vision. He was wearing a dark, oversized hoodie, despite the warm Atlanta evening, the hood pulled low over his forehead to obscure his features. He did not look at the fruit displays. He did not look at the price tags. He was looking directly at me. He moved with a stiff, unnatural purpose, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. He bumped into an older woman pushing a cart, completely ignoring her indignant gasp. As he pushed past her, his eyes locked dead on my face. My heart slammed against my ribs. I froze, the apple suddenly heavy in my hand. The man lunged. His right hand reached inside the front pocket of his hoodie, his fingers closing around the dark metallic grip of a weapon. He never got the chance to draw it. Marcus materialized from the canned goods aisle like a ghost. There was no shout, no warning, no dramatic confrontation. It was a display of pure, terrifyingly efficient close-quarters combat. Before the man could pull the weapon from his pocket, Marcus closed the gap, stepping inside the assailant's guard. With lightning speed, Marcus's left hand clamped down on the man's wrist, pinning the weapon inside the hoodie pocket. Simultaneously, Marcus drove his right forearm upward, delivering a devastating, bone-jarring strike directly to the man's exposed elbow joint. A sharp, sickening crack echoed over the soft jazz music. The man let out a strangled, breathless gasp as his arm snapped backward at an unnatural angle. Marcus did not stop. Using the momentum of the strike, he spun the assassin around, slamming him face first into the Apple display. The man's knees buckled, but Marcus held him upright, pinning his throat against the wooden crates with a forearm that felt like solid iron. Not a single apple rolled off the display. The entire takedown had taken less than 3 seconds. The shoppers in the immediate vicinity merely paused, glancing over with mild curiosity, assuming two men had simply bumped into each other. They had no idea they had just witnessed a military-grade neutralization. Marcus leaned in, pressing his mouth close to the assassin's ear. His voice was a deadly, quiet hiss that sent a shiver straight down my spine. "Tell your boss," Marcus whispered, applying just enough pressure to the man's throat to cut off his air supply, "that touching my wife is a death sentence. Do you understand me?" The man, pale and sweating profusely from the agonizing pain of his shattered arm, managed a frantic, jerky nod. Marcus released the pressure slightly, patting the man down with practiced efficiency. He smoothly extracted the weapon from the hoodie pocket, a suppressed compact handgun, and slipped it seamlessly into his own jacket without anyone noticing. "Walk away," Marcus commanded, his voice devoid of any mercy. "And do not ever let me see your face in this city again." Marcus stepped back, releasing his grip. The assassin stumbled forward, clutching his ruined arm to his chest. He did not look back. He scrambled down the aisle, shoving his way past a confused store clerk, and bolted for the automatic exit doors, vanishing into the night. I stood frozen, my breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The illusion of normalcy was completely shattered. The cartel was not just circling the perimeter anymore. They were making their move. They had sent a hitter into a crowded grocery store, broad daylight, zero hesitation. Marcus turned to me, his chest rising and falling in a slow, controlled rhythm. He did not look panicked. He looked furious. "We are leaving," he stated, placing a firm, protective hand on the small of my back. "Now." I did not argue. I left the plastic bag on the display and let him guide me toward the exit, his body shielding mine from the rest of the store. The ride back to the penthouse was executed in absolute, suffocating silence. Marcus drove the armored SUV with aggressive precision, taking 3 different detours and running 2 yellow lights to ensure we were not being followed. As we pulled into the secure underground parking garage of our building, the heavy steel gates rolling shut behind us, the adrenaline began to crash out of my system, leaving me shaking and cold. I had exposed Chloe's money laundering. I had the evidence that could send her and Preston to federal prison for decades. And now the cartel was coming for the person who had disrupted their pipeline. We stepped into the private elevator, Marcus immediately swiping his security card to lock the doors. As the elevator began its rapid ascent to the penthouse, my phone vibrated violently inside my purse. The sudden noise made me flinch. I pulled the phone out, my hands trembling as I stared at the screen. It was an encrypted text message from a blocked number, but the phrasing, the arrogant, toxic tone, belonged to only one person: Chloe. I opened the message, the bright light of the screen illuminating the dark elevator cab. "You are poking a fire ant nest," the message read. "Stop before you lose your life." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. You are poking a fire ant nest, the message read. Stop before you lose your life. I did not delete the message. I forwarded it to my secure server, logging it as a direct, undeniable threat. Marcus leaned over my shoulder, the faint smell of adrenaline and cold night air still clinging to his jacket. He read the text, the muscle in his jaw feathering in a silent, rigid promise of violence. They send a cartel hitter with a suppressed weapon into a grocery store, and she sends a text message like she is starring in a daytime reality television show, Marcus said, his voice vibrating with a dangerous, quiet rage. She thinks she is untouchable. She thinks this is a game. She is about to find out exactly how touchable she is, I replied. I tossed my phone onto the granite counter and walked straight to my multi-monitor setup in the home office. I was entirely done playing defense. My father wanted to freeze my assets and starve me out. Chloe wanted to send assassins to silence me in public to protect her perfect image. They thought they could bury me under the weight of their stolen power and immense privilege. It was time to burn their glass house to the absolute ground. I sat down at the console and cracked my knuckles. I had already compromised the church's financial mainframe, but that was just the corporate side of the corruption. To truly destroy Chloe, I needed the personal rot. I needed her digital soul. I targeted her Apple ecosystem. Chloe was incredibly vain and notoriously lazy with her digital security. She lived for the aesthetic, not the infrastructure. She relied on basic facial recognition and a predictable 4-digit passcode for everything she owned. I booted up a specialized virtual machine and initiated a brute force dictionary attack against her primary iCloud recovery email, routing my connection through an offshore proxy server in Switzerland to completely mask the intrusion. It took less than 12 minutes for her firewall to fracture. Her two-factor authentication was a pathetic hurdle. I intercepted the automated security code by temporarily cloning her device's MAC address onto my terminal. A progress bar flashed green, and suddenly my wide screens were flooded with the unfiltered, unedited contents of Chloe's entire digital existence. 10 years of synchronized data poured into my local drive. Text messages, emails, deleted photographs, hidden voice memos, offshore banking applications, and thousands of digital receipts. I initiated a rapid keyword search, running a proprietary algorithm to cross-reference the exact dates of the cartel wire transfers I had found on the church servers with Chloe's personal spending habits. The data compiled in seconds. The results were staggering. Chloe had painted a beautiful, tragic picture for the public of Atlanta. She was the devout Christian wife weeping on the gospel radio, betrayed by her unstable sister, completely oblivious to her husband's shocking crimes. But the ledgers staring back at me told a completely different, infinitely darker story. Chloe was not a victim. Chloe was the mastermind. I pulled up an expense report from 3 months ago. The exact same week, Preston had frantically wired $2 million to a shell company in Miami to appease the cartel. Chloe had spent $400,000 at a private appointment-only jeweler in Buckhead. I opened a folder labeled Spring Gala. It was packed with staggering invoices for lavish, over-the-top parties hosted for her elite alumni sorority network. She had ordered massive ice sculptures, imported French champagne, and private musical performances. She was dropping $500,000 a month just to maintain her undisputed title as the socialite queen of Atlanta. She was not just spending her husband's salary, she was actively greedily draining the cartel's money. I pulled up her encrypted messaging history with Preston. It was not the communication of a loving, blissfully unaware wife. It was the absolute tyranny of a mob boss commanding her terrified subordinate. The messages from Preston were frantic, laced with typos and desperate pleas. They are asking for the next shipment early. We do not have the liquidity. The offshore accounts are short. Chloe's response was cold and dismissive. Figure it out. I have the alumni gala next week and my custom Birkin is waiting in Paris. Wire the funds to my private account by Friday. Preston replied 3 minutes later. Chloe, they will kill me. The Miami guys are not playing around with this deficit. I cannot pull more from the church charity fund without triggering an external audit. Chloe's final message in that thread made my stomach churn. Then falsify the orphanage invoice again. Do not bore me with your incompetence. I sat back in my leather chair, absolutely repulsed by the sheer magnitude of her sociopathy. Preston was a criminal, yes, but he was a terrified, desperate bagman. Chloe was the true architect of the impending disaster. She was deliberately bleeding the cartel dry to fund her luxurious lifestyle, forcing her husband to scramble and embezzle mega-church donations just to cover the massive gaping deficits she created. She was stealing from violent narco-traffickers to buy designer handbags and diamond necklaces. And when the cartel finally came knocking for their missing millions, she threw Preston to the wolves, played the crying victim on national radio, and used my stolen trust fund to bail him out just to keep up appearances. Marcus leaned over the desk, reading the text messages as they scrolled across the screen. She is a sociopath, he stated, his voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. She is actively daring a cartel to murder her husband. She does not care if he dies, I replied, my eyes scanning the directories for the final piece of the puzzle. She just cares about keeping the money and the status. Preston is completely disposable to her. I needed the definitive nail in her coffin. Text messages could potentially be explained away as hacked or manipulated by a high-priced, slick defense attorney. I needed undeniable biometric proof that Chloe was fully aware of the church embezzlement and the cartel money. I needed her own voice. I accessed her hidden audio files. Chloe had an arrogant habit of using voice memos while driving her Mercedes, recording her thoughts, her personal to-do lists, and occasionally her arguments. She liked to hear herself speak. I ran an audio scrubbing program filtering the massive audio cache for Preston's named church funds and the Miami accounts. A compressed file from 2 weeks prior, right before my wedding, popped up on the grid. It was labeled simply with a single letter, P. I isolated the file and hit play. The high-definition audio filled the quiet penthouse office. The low, expensive purr of a luxury car engine rumbled in the background, followed by the sharp, impatient tapping of manicured fingernails against a steering wheel. Then Chloe's shrill, commanding voice echoed through the speakers laced with pure, unfiltered arrogance. I do not care what the Miami contacts are threatening, Preston, she snapped into the recording. Just take more money from the old man's fund. Those pious sheep are stupid. They will just donate again next month. I need the new Porsche. I stared at the glowing letters on my phone screen. The glaring white light cast long shadows across the dark interior of the elevator cab. Chloe was not just threatening me. She was openly flaunting her absolute lack of morality. She had morphed from a spoiled, entitled golden child into a hardened criminal who believed her social status made her bulletproof. I did not type a response. I did not block her number. I simply locked the screen and slid the phone back into my pocket. Marcus watched me, his jaw set in a rigid, unforgiving line. His protective instincts were running at a lethal high, but he knew me better than anyone. He knew I was not going to hide. Are we going to war, Nia? He asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble over the hum of the elevator. We are not going to war, I replied, keeping my gaze fixed on the metallic doors. We are going to execute a demolition. The moment the elevator doors parted, I walked straight to my command center in the penthouse. I bypassed my standard monitors and booted up a heavily modified localized server farm I kept strictly for offensive operations. I had previously breached the church's financial ledgers to find the cartel connections, but that was only half the picture. Preston was out on federal bail thanks to my stolen trust fund, but bail only kept him out of a government cell. It did not appease the Miami drug cartel. He had lost millions of their washed money to Chloe's insatiable vanity. The cartel did not care about federal indictments or megachurch politics. They cared about their cash, and they wanted it immediately. I needed to know exactly how a desperate, cornered man was planning to pay back a syndicate of ruthless narcotics traffickers before they put a bullet in his head. I launched a passive packet sniffer, directing it to scan every financial institution within a 50-mile radius of Atlanta for any new massive credit inquiries or emergency bridge loans linked to Preston Sterling or my parents. The system hummed, parsing through thousands of encrypted banking queries. For 20 minutes, the screens remained dark. Then a massive data spike lit up my tertiary monitor. A hard credit inquiry had been executed 48 hours ago. It was not routed through a traditional banking institution. It was processed by Vanguard Apex Capital, a shadowy, cutthroat private equity firm known for issuing high-risk, exorbitant interest loans to desperate clients who needed liquid cash overnight. They were essentially legalized loan sharks. I isolated the loan origination document and cracked the firm's shallow security firewall. The file opened. The principal loan amount was staggering. $5 million wired directly to an offshore holding account that I already knew belonged to the Miami cartel. Preston had secured the money to save his own skin. But a firm like Vanguard Apex did not hand over $5 million without collateral. I scrolled down to the underwriting section of the digital contract, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted lines of text. I ran a quick decryption script to strip away the black bars. The collateral asset listed on the loan agreement made the breath completely vanish from my lungs. Property ID 8847, Oakwood Mansion. My hands hovered frozen over the keyboard. Oakwood Mansion was not just a piece of real estate. It was the absolute crown jewel of the Thomas family empire. It was a sprawling, pristine 10,000-square-foot neoclassical estate situated on 4 acres of elite Buckhead property. It was the physical manifestation of my parents' immense pride, their status, and their unyielding arrogance. Growing up, Oakwood was the grand stage for my mother's flawless performances. She hosted lavish, exclusive charity galas in the grand ballroom, rubbing elbows with senators and celebrities. During those events, I was routinely instructed to remain out of sight in the kitchen or the upstairs library because my quiet demeanor and refusal to wear ostentatious designer gowns ruined her carefully curated aesthetic. Oakwood was their fortress. It was entirely in their names, paid off completely a decade ago using church funds they had quietly funneled into private trusts. And Preston had just mortgaged it to a predatory lending firm to pay off a drug cartel. I pulled the digital signatures attached to the deed transfer and the power of attorney. Preston had not acted alone. The metadata showed the documents were signed using my father's proprietary digital certificate and my mother's secondary biometric approval. But the IP address where the signatures originated was not my parents' Buckhead estate. It was Preston and Chloe's luxury condo. Chloe had stolen our parents' digital credentials. She had actively helped her husband forge their signatures, secretly leveraging the roof over our parents' heads to clean up her own catastrophic cartel-sized mess. I dug deeper into the loan terms, my eyes flying across the brutal legal jargon. It was a 30-day bridge loan with a punitive default clause. Preston was supposed to make a balloon payment of $1 million yesterday to keep the loan in good standing. I checked the payment ledger. It was empty. Preston had missed the payment. He had no money left. I immediately pinged the county property registry, bypassing the municipal firewall to access the back-end legal filings. A new document had been uploaded quietly to the county server just 3 hours ago. It was a notice of non-judicial foreclosure, because Preston had used a private equity firm and signed a waiver of judicial review. Vanguard Apex did not need to drag my parents through a lengthy court battle to seize the property. The default clause granted them immediate possession upon a missed payment. The firm had already quietly foreclosed on Oakwood Mansion. I stared at the screen, a dark, profound sense of poetic justice settling over me. My parents had absolutely no idea. Right at this very second, they were likely sitting in their custom leather recliners in the Oakwood drawing room, drinking expensive imported wine, perfectly content in their ignorance. They believed they had won. They believed they had successfully frozen my trust fund, ruined my reputation, and saved their perfect golden son-in-law. They were still blindly trusting the daughter who had just secretly sold their most prized possession to a group of financial predators. I checked the liquidation schedule attached to the foreclosure notice. Private equity firms did not hold on to seized real estate. They flipped it instantly to recover their capital. Oakwood Mansion was scheduled to be sold at a private sealed bid auction tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. If a random investor bought it, my parents would be served with a sudden, humiliating eviction notice by armed sheriffs. They would lose their home, their status, and their dignity in front of the entire city. It would be a catastrophic public scandal. But that was not enough. I did not just want them to lose their house to a stranger. I wanted to be the one holding the deed. I wanted to legally, undeniably own the ground they walked on. I wanted to look my father in the eye when he realized that the daughter he threw away was now his landlord. There was only one massive obstacle: my grandmother's $2 million trust fund. My primary source of liquid capital was still frozen by Judge Miller's corrupt court order. My corporate accounts at Aegis Cyber were locked down to protect my employees' payroll. I did not have the $5 million in liquid cash required to win a private auction by tomorrow morning. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the flashing cursor on the black screen. I needed an overwhelming amount of untraceable capital, and I needed it in less than 12 hours. I opened a secure encrypted satellite line. I bypassed my standard contacts and accessed a hidden localized directory. I pulled up a specific highly classified number. I had not dialed this number in over 2 years, but I knew the man on the other end would answer on the first ring. His name was Elias Vance. He was a ruthless, notoriously private tech billionaire who owned a massive global logistics empire. 2 years ago, a Russian cyber syndicate had breached his company's mainframe, locking down his entire shipping network with a devastating ransomware attack. They demanded $50 million, threatening to bankrupt his empire in hours. The federal government had been useless. Elias had quietly reached out to Aegis Cyber in a total panic. I had personally cracked the Russian encryption, purged the virus from his servers, and restored his entire global network in under 6 hours. Elias Vance owed me his corporate life. He had told me I had a blank check whenever I needed it. I initiated the call. The line hissed with static as the encryption protocols locked into place. It rang exactly once before a deep, gravelly voice answered. Naya, Elias said, sounding completely unsurprised to hear from me at this hour. I saw the news about your company. I saw the smear campaign your father is running. I was wondering when you were going to call. I am not calling for a shoulder to cry on, Elias. I said, my voice cold and focused. I need you to execute a hostile financial takeover. Tell me the target. Elias replied, his tone instantly shifting into business. I need you to buy up all the Thomas family's bad debt. I instructed, my eyes locked on the foreclosure documents glowing on my screen. I need you to win a sealed bid auction tomorrow morning for Oakwood Mansion. Pay whatever it takes to secure the deed. And then I need you to transfer the absolute creditor rights and the property title directly to Aegis Cyber. Today, Elias Vance delivered exactly as promised. By noon the following day, the highly confidential sealed bid auction for Oakwood Mansion was over. Vanguard Apex Capital received their $5 million wire transfer from Elias's offshore holding company. Within the hour, the absolute creditor rights, the underlying mortgage notes, and the unencumbered property title to my parents' sprawling 10,000-square-foot estate were legally transferred into the corporate holding accounts of Aegis Cyber. I was officially my parents' landlord, and they were trespassing on my property. I could have dispatched the county sheriff to Buckhead immediately to serve the eviction notice. I could have had my parents dragged out onto their pristine manicured lawn in broad daylight while their wealthy neighbors watched from their luxury sedans. But serving an eviction notice in private, even a humiliating one, was far too quiet for the magnitude of their crimes. I wanted the demolition of their toxic empire to be as loud as public and as inescapable as the lies they had built it upon. The perfect stage was already set. That evening was the highly publicized 30th anniversary gala for the Atlanta megachurch. It was the undisputed social event of the season, a glittering, opulent display of tax-exempt wealth. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel had been rented out entirely. Hundreds of VIPs, local politicians, the mayor, the chief of police, and multiple regional media outlets were gathered to celebrate my father's religious empire. They were drinking $1,000 champagne and eating caviar completely unaware that the extravagant ice sculptures and floral arrangements were indirectly funded by a ruthless Miami drug cartel. Marcus and I did not arrive alone. When you are walking into a den of vipers who actively launder money for narco-traffickers, you do not go in unprotected. Marcus had quietly mobilized a six-man detail of his former Tier 1 military operators men, who now worked as high-threat security contractors for Aegis Cyber. They were dressed in impeccably tailored dark suits, moving with the terrifying synchronized precision of apex predators. They did not look like standard event security. They looked like an elite strike force. We pushed through the heavy gilded mahogany doors of the grand ballroom just as the keynote presentation reached its climax. The room was bathed in warm golden light. Crystal chandeliers sparkled brilliantly over dozens of tables draped in white silk. On the main stage, standing behind a transparent crystal podium, were Chloe and Preston. They were bathing in the rapturous applause of the city's elite, holding a massive custom-engraved glass trophy between them. Chloe was wearing a custom couture gown that likely cost more than a luxury vehicle, smiling her perfect practice smile for the flashing cameras of the local press. And now the master of ceremonies announced, his booming voice echoing perfectly through the state-of-the-art sound system. We proudly present the Golden Donor Award to Preston and Chloe Sterling for their unprecedented $2 million personal contribution to our community expansion project. The applause thundered through the room, a sickening wave of adoration for two people who were actively embezzling funds to cover their cartel debts. Chloe leaned into the microphone, preparing to deliver a tearful, hypocritical speech about the spirit of giving and Christian charity. Then the heavy ballroom doors clicked shut behind us, the heavy brass latch echoing like a gunshot over the applause. My mother Vivian was sitting at the primary VIP table, situated directly at the front of the stage, flanked by the mayor and his wife. She spotted me instantly. The performative, gracious smile melted off her face, replaced instantly by a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She did not care about the optics, the cameras, or the politicians sitting beside her. She only cared about asserting her absolute control. "Security!" my mother hissed. She shot out of her chair, the legs of the antique seat scraping violently against the marble floor. She pointed a manicured, trembling finger directly at my chest. "Throw this trash out right now. She is not on the guest list. Remove her immediately." Four burly event security guards wearing standard earpieces and matching blazers moved aggressively down the center aisle toward us. They clearly expected an easy routine removal of an unwanted disruptive guest. They were tragically mistaken. Marcus did not even raise his voice. He did not break his stride. He merely gave a single subtle hand signal. His security detail seamlessly fanned out, creating an impenetrable tactical wedge around me. They did not draw weapons. They did not shout warnings or adopt aggressive fighting stances. They simply shifted their body weight, dropping their centers of gravity, their eyes locking onto the approaching hotel guards with a dead absolute focus. The sheer, overwhelming aura of lethal competence hit the event staff like a physical wall. The hotel's security guards stopped cold in their tracks, visibly swallowing hard. They raised their hands defensively, refusing to take a single step closer to Marcus's team. They recognized instantly that engaging these men would result in severe, immediate hospitalization. "What are you doing?" my father boomed, his face flushing crimson as he stormed over to the frozen security guards. "I pay your firm thousands of dollars for this event. Do your jobs and remove her immediately." "They are not going to touch her," Marcus stated. He stepped smoothly around the wedge of his men, placing himself directly in my father's personal space. His voice was a low, terrifying rumble that carried perfectly over the sudden dead silence that had fallen over the ballroom. "And if you take one more step toward my wife, I will consider it a hostile threat, and I will permanently neutralize it. Do you understand me?" My father froze, the arrogant bluster completely draining from his face as he looked up into Marcus's eyes. He saw exactly what the cartel assassin had seen in the grocery store aisle. No hesitation. Zero mercy. My father slowly took a step backward, raising his hands in a placating gesture, completely humiliated in front of his wealthiest donors. With the perimeter absolutely secured, I walked straight down the center aisle. The sea of politicians, wealthy socialites, and eager reporters parted for me, murmuring in confused, shocked whispers. I kept my posture rigid, my chin high, and my eyes locked dead on the stage. Chloe's smug, victorious smile had completely vanished. She clutched the heavy crystal trophy to her chest, her knuckles turning bone white against the glass. Preston looked like he was going to be physically sick. He was sweating profusely under the stage lights, his eyes darting frantically toward the emergency exits at the back of the auditorium. He knew exactly what I was capable of, and he knew his time had finally run out. I climbed the velvet-lined steps with measured, deliberate steps and walked right up to the crystal podium. The master of ceremonies tried to step in my way, offering a nervous, placating smile, but I simply brushed past him, taking total physical control of the presentation laptop that fed the massive digital displays behind the stage. "Nia, stop this right now," Chloe hissed, leaning in close so the podium microphones would not pick up her venomous tone. Her eyes were wide with panic, but she still tried to maintain her air of superiority. "You are embarrassing yourself. You have no power here. You are ruining my moment." I looked at her, noting the slight, uncontrollable tremor in her perfectly manicured hands. "I have all the power, Chloe," I whispered back, my voice laced with cold, absolute certainty. "I just bought your parents' house." Her eyes widened in pure, uncomprehending shock. The color vanished from her cheeks as the reality of my words slammed into her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Before she could process the sheer magnitude of the destruction I was about to unleash, I reached down and yanked the central presentation cable out of the church's laptop. I pulled the encrypted USB drive from my blazer pocket and smoothly plugged it into the primary port. I tapped the enter key. The massive high-definition screens behind the stage flickered wildly, immediately cutting off the glittering, rotating logo of the Atlanta megachurch. The grand ballroom plunged into shadow for a split second, drawing gasps from the audience before the screens blazed back to life, illuminating the shocked, upturned faces of the city's elite in a harsh, glaring white light. A single massive line of bold black text appeared across the center of the screens. "The truth about retirement. The truth about the pension fund." The words burned across the 80-foot LED displays in stark, unforgiving white against a blood-red background. For a fraction of a second, the grand ballroom was entirely silent. The collective confusion of 500 elite guests hung in the air like a held breath. Then my father moved. "Turn it off!" he bellowed, his voice raw with panic. He lunged across the stage, shoving past a frozen Preston to reach the crystal podium. He grabbed the primary microphone, his knuckles white, his face contorted in a mask of furious authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse this technical difficulty. We are experiencing a cyber attack from a disgruntled—" His voice cut out completely. He tapped the microphone grid, producing a dull, dead thud. He glared at the sound booth at the back of the room, motioning frantically for the audio engineers to fix the feed. They were already scrambling over their mixing boards in total panic, but their efforts were entirely useless. I held up my phone. The screen displayed the master control interface for the hotel's entire audiovisual network. I locked the audio mainframe from the parking lot, I said, my voice projecting crystal clear through the secondary lavalier microphone I had clipped to my blazer lapel moments before entering the room. "You have no voice here anymore." My father stared at me, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a sudden, paralyzing realization. He was completely powerless. I turned my attention to the sea of faces in the grand ballroom. The mayor was whispering urgently to his security detail. Wealthy donors were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "You are currently applauding two people who just drained $5 million from your community retirement fund," I stated, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I pressed a single button on my phone. The massive screens behind me shifted. The title card vanished, replaced instantly by high-resolution, unredacted banking records. I had bypassed the need for complex financial jargon and presented the data with brutal visual clarity. A red line tracked a sequence of wire transfers originating directly from the Atlanta megachurch's senior pension accounts. The screen highlighted the exact dates and the massive withdrawals moving step by step into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The next slide hit the screen before anyone could look away. It showed the corporate ownership documents for that exact offshore account. The sole proprietor listed was Preston Sterling. A loud collective gasp rippled through the audience. Chairs scraped against the marble floor as several prominent parishioners stood up, pulling out their reading glasses to stare at the undeniable proof displayed on the 80-foot screens. "This is a complete fabrication," my mother shrieked from the VIP table. She was on her feet, her designer gown trembling as she pointed at me. "She is a sick, jealous woman. She has spent her entire life trying to destroy her sister. Do not look at those screens." I ignored her entirely and advanced to the next slide. "You were told the pension fund was severely depleted due to market fluctuations and bad real estate investments." I continued pacing slowly across the stage. "You were told that Preston and Chloe were selflessly donating $2 million of their own money to keep the church afloat. But they are not donors. They are thieves." The screen flashed a blinding sequence of invoices, digital receipts, and luxury purchase orders. I highlighted the dates of Preston's massive embezzlements and placed them side by side with Chloe's spending habits. "Look closely at where your retirement savings actually went," I commanded the room. A receipt for a $400,000 diamond necklace from an exclusive Buckhead jeweler appeared, dated 3 days after a massive withdrawal from the church's charity account. Next came the purchase order for a custom $200,000 Porsche 911 registered directly in Chloe's name. Then a dizzying array of invoices for private jets, Parisian shopping sprees, and $500,000 sorority galas. Every single document was stamped with Chloe's undeniable biometric signature and linked perfectly to the stolen church funds. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The polite, restrained atmosphere of the high society gala shattered instantly. Elderly parishioners, people who had trusted my father with their life savings, began shouting at the stage. The mayor's wife dropped her champagne glass, the crystal shattering sharply against the floor as she grabbed her husband's arm. Flashbulbs from the local press corps began firing in a blinding, relentless strobe effect. Reporters were already live streaming the screens from their phones, broadcasting the raw, unfiltered evidence to the entire city. I had embedded a QR code in the bottom corner of the presentation. I watched as dozens of journalists and skeptical donors raised their phones, scanning the code and instantly downloading the entire unredacted data packet directly to their personal devices. The evidence was now completely out of my hands and immortalized on the internet. There was absolutely no putting the genie back in the bottle. My father stumbled backward, clutching his chest as he stared at the screens. The empire he had spent 4 decades building on a foundation of hypocrisy and manipulation was burning to the ground in less than 3 minutes. Marcus's security detail maintained their rigid perimeter around the stage, their faces carved from stone. 2 event security guards tried to push past the barrier to reach the power cables, but a single warning glance from Marcus sent them retreating back into the chaotic crowd. I turned my gaze to Preston. He looked like a man standing on the gallows. His designer tuxedo was soaked in sweat. He was staring at the screens, his mouth hanging open as he realized the full magnitude of his destruction. He was not just facing public humiliation. The offshore accounts I had just exposed to the local media were the exact same accounts he used to launder money for the Miami drug cartel. The FBI would have his assets frozen by morning, and the cartel would know exactly who was responsible for exposing their financial pipeline. He was a dead man walking. Preston's eyes darted wildly around the room. He looked at my father, who was too busy hyperventilating to notice him. He looked at my mother, who was desperately trying to block the cameras of a local news crew. Finally, he looked at the side exit. The heavy brass door leading to the service hallway was only 20 feet away. He took a step backward, abandoning the crystal trophy on the podium. He took another step, his eyes wide with primal animalistic panic. He was going to run. He was going to leave his wife, his in-laws, and his entire life behind to save his own skin. But Chloe saw him moving. Chloe had spent her entire existence being the golden child. She had been conditioned to believe that she was entirely flawless, entirely untouchable, and fundamentally superior to everyone in her orbit. But as she watched the reporters flocking toward the stage, demanding answers about her diamond necklaces and stolen sports cars, The reality of federal prison finally pierced her impenetrable vanity. She saw her husband backing toward the exit, preparing to leave her to face the angry mob alone. Chloe's survival instincts engaged with vicious, cold-blooded clarity. She realized instantly that the only way to save her public image, the only way to avoid trading her couture gowns for a federal jumpsuit, was to completely obliterate the man standing next to her. She lunged across the stage, her high heels snapping against the wood. She shoved past my father and grabbed the analog backup microphone resting on the band's equipment rack. It was a hardwired secondary line that ran directly to the hotel's emergency PA system, completely bypassing the digital mixer I had locked down. A loud, piercing feedback squeal ripped through the ballroom, forcing several guests to cover their ears. The crowd fell silent, their attention snapping back to the stage as Chloe raised the microphone to her lips. She pointed a trembling, perfectly manicured finger directly at her husband's chest. "It was him," Chloe screamed, her voice echoing with theatrical, desperate betrayal. "He did it all. He lied to me. He told me the money was from his legitimate investments. I had absolutely no idea he was stealing from the church. Preston is a criminal." Preston froze halfway to the exit, his jaw dropping as his own wife publicly delivered the fatal blow. Chloe did not just stop at pointing fingers. She dropped to her knees right there on the polished wood of the stage. Real tears streamed down her perfectly contoured face, ruining her expensive makeup. She turned toward our parents at the VIP table, clutching her chest, as if her heart was physically breaking. "I swear to God, I had no idea," she sobbed into the analog microphone, her voice vibrating with practiced, desperate anguish. "He used my name. He used our family. Mom, Dad, you have to believe me. He manipulated my accounts to hide his filthy crimes. I am a victim of this monster just like the rest of you." Preston stared at her, his face completely bloodless. The betrayal was so absolute, so swift, that it paralyzed his flight response. He opened his mouth, stammering blindly, but no sound came out. He was a ruthless corporate criminal, but he was completely outmatched by his wife's sheer sociopathy. She was ready to send him to a federal penitentiary for the rest of his life, if it meant she could keep her country club membership. I stood at the crystal podium and let out a single sharp laugh. Because my lavalier microphone was still routed through the primary sound system, the sound boomed across the vast ballroom, instantly cutting through Chloe's theatrical sobbing. "That is an incredible performance, Chloe," I said, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "Truly worthy of an award. It is almost believable. But you forgot one tiny crucial detail when you decided to play the innocent martyr." I looked down at the riled-up crowd, then back at my sister. Her fake tears instantly stopped. Her eyes darted toward me, narrowing with sudden primal panic. "You never delete your iCloud backups," I stated clearly. "And you love the sound of your own voice way too much." I tapped the enter key on the presentation laptop. The massive screens behind the stage shifted from the financial ledgers to a simple audio playback interface. A waveform appeared, glowing bright red. Chloe's unmistakable, arrogant voice blasted through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers. It was not the sweet, pious tone she used for the congregation on Sunday mornings. It was the sharp, venomous command of a woman who thought she was a god. "I do not care what the Miami contacts are threatening, Preston," the recorded voice sneered. The high-definition audio capturing the purr of her luxury car engine in the background. "Just take more money from the old man's fund. Those pious sheep are stupid. They will just donate again next month. I need the new Porsche." For 3 agonizing seconds, the grand ballroom was caught in a vacuum of utter disbelief. The audio clip looped automatically, playing a second time, just to ensure every single person in the room heard the words pious sheep and stupid with absolute clarity. Chloe scrambled backward on the stage, dropping the emergency microphone as if it had burned her hands. It hit the floor with a loud crack of static. Her face twisted into a mask of pure terror. She looked at the crowd, then at my parents, realizing her glass shield was completely, irrevocably shattered. The vacuum broke. The crowd absolutely exploded. The polite restraint of Atlanta's high society vanished in a terrifying instant, replaced by the primal fury of people who had just been robbed and humiliated to their faces. The elderly donors who had given their life savings to the church began screaming. A heavy crystal water glass flew from the darkness of the crowd, shattering against the edge of the stage right next to Chloe's foot. "Thief!" a woman shrieked from the third row, her voice carrying over the chaos. "Give us our money back!" Dozens of parishioners surged forward, pushing against the tables, their faces red with betrayal. Men in expensive tuxedos were shouting obscenities, demanding the police, demanding blood. Reporters pushed against the tide of angry donors, thrusting their recording phones into the air to capture the implosion of the city's most powerful religious family. The elegant anniversary gala had officially turned into a violent riot. Marcus's security detail immediately tightened their perimeter around the podium, forming an unbreakable human wall between the surging crowd and my position. They stood like stone statues as the chaos erupted around them, their eyes scanning the mob for active threats. I was completely safe inside their perimeter, watching the destruction unfold with cold, detached precision. I looked down at the VIP table. My father, the untouchable patriarch who had banished me from this family, had physically collapsed into his chair. His hands were gripping his chest, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps as he stared blankly at the rioting crowd. The political connections, the immense wealth, the carefully curated image of divine perfection, it was all burning to ash in front of his eyes. He was not a powerful leader anymore. He was a fraud whose own daughter had just bankrupted his followers. My mother, Vivian, was no longer yelling for security to remove me. She was sitting frozen in her seat, her hands covering her mouth, shaking violently as the terrifying reality of federal prison and complete social destruction washed over her. She looked up at Chloe, who was cowering at the back of the stage. My mother did not look at her golden child with love or a desire to protect her. She looked at Chloe with pure, unadulterated hatred. Preston finally snapped out of his shock. Seeing the mob pressing against the stage and realizing the cartel would soon see this broadcast, he turned and bolted for the service exit. He shoved past a terrified waiter, hit the crash bar on the heavy metal door, and disappeared into the back hallways of the hotel, leaving his screaming wife to face the angry mob alone. Chloe was trapped. The exit was blocked by surging reporters and furious parishioners throwing centerpieces at the stage. She backed against the massive LED screen displaying her own financial crimes, her hands raised defensively as she screamed for our parents to help her. They did not move. They sat at their table, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their ruin, watching the crowd close in. The chaotic roar of the ballroom amplified as the recording echoed in the minds of everyone present. Chloe pressed her back hard against the massive LED screen, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. The parishioners she had just called stupid pious sheep were now practically storming the stage. A heavy silver fork sailed through the air, narrowly missing Chloe's head and clattering violently across the wooden floorboards. She tried to raise the backup microphone again to defend herself, to spin another web of lies, but a furious donor grabbed the microphone cord from the front row and yanked it downward. The microphone ripped from Chloe's hand and smashed into the orchestra pit. My mother finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. But she did not turn her fury toward the daughter who had just been exposed as a manipulative, embezzling criminal. She did not look toward the service exit, where her golden son-in-law had just fled to escape a drug cartel. True to decades of toxic conditioning, Vivian turned her absolute, unhinged wrath directly onto me. She clawed her way past the stunned mayor and scrambled up the side steps of the stage. Her designer gown caught on a lighting rig, tearing audibly, but she did not care. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. "You are a devil!" she screamed, her voice cracking as she lunged toward the podium. She raised her hand high, aiming a desperate, vicious slap directly at my face. "No matter what, this is your family's church. This is your home. Are you going to let your parents live on the streets?" The blow never landed. Marcus moved with terrifying speed. He did not hurt her, but he caught her wrist mid-air with a grip like an industrial vice. The sudden, immovable stop sent a shockwave through my mother's arm, forcing her to gasp in pain. Marcus did not flinch. He simply stared down at her, his eyes dead and unfeeling before roughly tossing her arm back toward her side. He stepped squarely between us, a silent, impenetrable wall of muscle and protective fury. I stepped out from behind the crystal podium, bypassing Marcus, to look my mother directly in the eyes. I felt no fear. I felt absolutely no pity. I reached into the interior pocket of my blazer. "Live on the streets," I asked, my voice deadly calm, carrying perfectly through my lapel microphone, so the entire rioting ballroom could hear every single word. "You are right. Because the Oakwood mansion you live in was mortgaged and foreclosed by Preston." My mother froze. The blind rage on her face instantly dissolved into profound, uncomprehending confusion. "That is impossible," my father bellowed. He had finally managed to pull himself up onto the stage, his chest heaving as he stood beside my mother. "The estate is completely paid off. It is in a secure, irrevocable trust. You are lying." I pulled a heavy, bright red folder from my blazer along with a heavy brass key ring. The metal keys clinked sharply in the tense air. "Nothing is secure when your golden child has access to your biometric data," I stated flatly. I held the red folder up for the crowd and the cameras to see. "Chloe and Preston stole your digital credentials. They forged your signatures on a power of attorney and took out a $5 million bridge loan from a predatory private equity firm to pay back their cartel suppliers. And when Preston missed the balloon payment yesterday, the firm executed a non-judicial foreclosure. They seized Oakwood Mansion instantly." My father looked at Chloe. She was sliding down the LED screen, pulling her knees to her chest, unable to meet his eyes. Her silence was a deafening confirmation of her guilt. The realization hit my father like a physical blow to the stomach. His legs gave out and he collapsed heavily onto the edge of the stage. I tossed the red folder onto the floorboards right in front of his knees. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "The equity firm listed the property for a sealed bid auction this morning." I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly through the silent, captivated room. "They wanted to liquidate the asset immediately to recover their capital. If a random developer had bought it, armed county sheriffs would have dragged you out onto the street tomorrow morning." My mother let out a strangled, breathless sob. She looked down at the red folder, as if it were a venomous snake. "We have nothing," she whispered, the reality of her total social and financial ruin finally breaking her mind. "The church is gone. The money is gone. We have nowhere to go." I stared down at the two people who had made my entire existence a miserable conditional transaction. They had built an empire on lies, and I had just dismantled it with the truth. I dropped the heavy brass keyring right on top of the red folder. "And the person who just bought the creditor rights outright," I said, leaning in so they could hear the absolute finality in my tone. "The person who is officially the legal owner of that mansion is me." My father's head snapped up. His eyes were bloodshot wide with a terrifying mixture of horror and sudden desperate hope. He looked at me, his estranged, scapegoated daughter, and his mind immediately defaulted to his usual manipulative tactics. He saw a lifeline. "Nia," he choked out, his voice trembling as he reached out a shaking hand toward my shoe. "You bought it. You saved the house. I knew you would not let us fall. You are our daughter. We can fix this. We can explain the missing funds. We can rebuild." I looked down at his outstretched hand, feeling a wave of intense, icy disgust. Even now, completely destroyed, he believed he could use me. He believed my money, my grandmother's legacy, and my corporate power were just extensions of his own twisted empire. "I did not save the house for you," I stated, stepping back so his hand grasped nothing but empty air. "I bought it so I could be the one to evict you." The silence that followed was absolute. "You have exactly 12 hours to clear your personal belongings out of my property," I announced, looking between my mother and my father. "Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, Aegis cybersecurity contractors will lock down the perimeter of Oakwood Mansion. Anything left inside will be considered abandoned property and thrown into a commercial dumpster. Do not test me. I will have you arrested for trespassing on my land." "But where will we go?" my mother wailed, dropping to her knees beside my father. The expensive fabric of her dress pooled around her in the spilled champagne and broken glass. We cannot pack a 10,000 square foot house in 12 hours. Naya, please, you cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. You did it to me, I replied, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. 5 years ago, you threw me out on the street with nothing but a suitcase because I did not fit your perfect aesthetic. You told me I was a failure. You let Chloe steal my trust fund to bail out her criminal husband. You tried to destroy my company, my employees, and my reputation just to protect your precious image. You made your choices. Now you get to live in the reality you created. I turned away from them. I did not look back at Chloe, who was weeping uncontrollably in the corner of the stage. I did not look at the mayor, who was frantically dialing his crisis management team. I did not look at the angry parishioners who were now demanding the immediate resignation of the entire church board. I looked at Marcus. He gave me a single approving nod, his eyes blazing with fierce pride. We are done here, I told him. Marcus signaled his men. The elite security contractors seamlessly adjusted their formation, creating a clear, protected path through the chaotic ballroom. As we walked down the center aisle, the crowd parted respectfully, giving us a wide berth. The cameras continued to flash, capturing every second of my departure, but I did not stop to give interviews or make statements. The digital evidence I had unleashed was already doing the work for me. When we pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air of the hotel courtyard, I took a deep breath. My lungs filled with oxygen, and for the first time in my entire life, I did not feel the suffocating weight of my parents' expectations. The heavy, invisible chain that had bound me to their toxic approval was completely severed. I looked up at the Atlanta skyline, the city lights reflecting in Marcus's eyes as he wrapped his arm protectively around my waist. The empire of lies was officially dead, and the crown they had fought so hard to keep was finally turned to dust. The quiet of the courtyard was shattered before we even reached the street. The distant high-pitched wail of sirens pierced the crisp night air. Within seconds, the sound multiplied, echoing off the high-rise buildings of downtown Atlanta. It was not just one or two police cruisers, it was a massive coordinated convoy. The deafening roar of heavy engines and blaring sirens closed in on the Four Seasons from every direction. Marcus looked down at me, his expression perfectly serene despite the impending chaos. He pulled his phone from his tactical vest and glanced at the screen. Right on schedule, he noted smoothly. I looked up at him, the flashing red and blue lights already beginning to reflect off the hotel's glass facade. You called them? Marcus offered a cold, predatory smile. I did not just call them Nia. While you were busy legally seizing their real estate and hijacking their audio-visual network, I was compiling the hard data. I bypassed the cartel's encryption and packaged every single wire transfer, every offshore routing number, and every forged signature. I handed the entire digital footprint directly to the DEA field office and the FBI Organized Crime Task Force on a silver platter 3 hours ago. The federal government does not take kindly to international narcotics syndicates laundering millions through tax-exempt religious organizations. Before I could fully process the absolute finality of Marcus's tactical strike, the heavy brass doors of the hotel lobby violently crashed open behind us. Preston stumbled out into the courtyard. He looked entirely unhinged. His designer tuxedo jacket was torn at the shoulder. His bow tie hung loose around his neck, and his face was slick with a sickening layer of sweat. The desperate, animalistic panic in his eyes had morphed into pure homicidal rage. He had tried to escape through the service corridors only to find every exit sealed off by hotel security reacting to the riot inside. He spotted us standing near the valet drop-off. His eyes locked onto me with a terrifying, venomous intensity. "You ruined me!" Preston screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. He took a stumbling step forward. "The cartel is going to kill me. They are going to slaughter my entire family because of you. If I am going down, you are coming with me." Preston reached down toward his ankle. In one frantic, jerky motion, he pulled a small tactical dagger from a concealed sock holster. The polished steel blade caught the harsh glare of the approaching police lights. He let out a raw, guttural roar and lunged directly at me, the knife raised in a desperate arc. He did not even make it within 5 feet of my dress. Marcus did not flinch. He did not draw his firearm. He simply stepped into Preston's path with the terrifying lethal grace of a special forces operator. As Preston brought the blade down, Marcus moved faster than my eyes could track. He sidestepped the strike, grabbed Preston's extended arm, and twisted his momentum entirely against him. Marcus delivered a devastating upward palm strike under Preston's chin, instantly snapping his head back. In the exact same fluid motion, Marcus brought his heavy combat boot down squarely onto Preston's knee. The sickening hollow crunch of ligaments tearing and bone shattering echoed sharply in the courtyard. Preston shrieked in agony, dropping the knife instantly. Before the dagger even hit the pavement, Marcus wrenched Preston's arm behind his back and drove him face first into the concrete. A second brutal snap echoed as Marcus intentionally hyperextended and broke Preston's wrist, ensuring he could not reach for another weapon. Preston lay on the ground sobbing and thrashing weakly in a puddle of muddy valet water. Marcus placed his boot firmly on the back of Preston's neck, pinning him to the concrete. "Touching my wife is the last mistake of your life," Marcus stated, his voice a low, lethal vibration that cut straight through Preston's pathetic sobbing. At that exact moment, a fleet of black armored SUVs and local police cruisers skidded onto the hotel's manicured circular driveway. Heavily armed DEA agents and SWAT operators poured out of the vehicles, their tactical boots hitting the pavement in perfect synchronization. They bypassed us entirely, storming through the main entrance of the hotel with assault rifles raised and federal badges flashing. Marcus stepped back from Preston, allowing 2 federal agents to haul the broken, weeping man off the concrete. They slapped heavy steel cuffs onto his uninjured wrist and dragged him toward a waiting transport van. I turned my attention back to the hotel lobby. Through the massive glass walls, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the grand ballroom entrance. The riot had been swiftly contained by the influx of federal agents. The elite donors and politicians were backed against the walls, watching in stunned silence as the authorities took absolute control of the room. Then I saw Chloe. 2 federal agents were hauling her out of the ballroom. She was fighting them with the sheer, unhinged desperation of a woman who had just realized her entire universe was evaporating. Her pristine, multi-$1,000 haute couture gown was stained with spilled wine and trampled at the hem. Her perfect, expensive hair was a tangled, chaotic mess around her face. "Get your filthy hands off me!" Chloe shrieked, thrashing her shoulders wildly. "You cannot do this. Do you know who I am? My father plays golf with the governor. I am a victim. My husband lied to me. I did not do anything wrong." The female DEA agent handling her did not show an ounce of pity. She shoved Chloe hard against a marble pillar in the lobby. Chloe let out a sharp gasp of pain as the agent forcefully wrenched her arms behind her back. "Save it for the judge," the agent snapped. The metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around Chloe's delicate wrists sounded like the closing of a vault door. Chloe let out a prolonged, agonizing wail. It was not the performative, theatrical crying she used to manipulate our parents. It was a raw, visceral scream of total defeat. In that single moment, she lost absolutely everything. Her untouchable sorority status, her stolen wealth, her sprawling mansions, and her freedom were completely gone. She was no longer the golden child of Atlanta society. She was a federal inmate. Through the glass, I saw my parents standing near the ballroom doors. My father was leaning heavily against a decorative table, his face ashen, looking like an old, broken man who had just watched his entire legacy burn to ash. My mother was clutching his arm, weeping uncontrollably as she watched her perfect, flawless daughter being walked through the hotel lobby in handcuffs. They did not try to stop the agents. They did not try to use their wealth or their influence to save her. They knew it was utterly pointless. They were ruined. Chloe caught sight of me standing outside the glass doors as the agents dragged her toward the police cruisers. Her tear-streaked face twisted into an expression of profound, inescapable despair. She finally realized that the quiet, introverted sister she had spent a lifetime mocking stealing from and trying to destroy, was the one holding the keys to her kingdom. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked at her with total unwavering indifference. I turned away, slipping my arm through Marcus's, and walked off into the city, leaving the wreckage of the Thomas family empire exactly where it belonged. 30 days later, the dust from the Four Seasons Gala had finally settled over Atlanta, leaving a completely transformed landscape in its wake. The local and national news cycles had run the story nonstop. The spectacular implosion of the Thomas religious empire was a media sensation, a cautionary tale of greed, vanity, and absolute hubris. But the public scandal was only the beginning of their punishment. The true devastation lay in the permanent reality of their new lives. I stood on the sprawling front lawn of Oakwood Mansion, watching a crew of contractors carefully remove the ornate gold leaf gates that had once guarded my parents' fortress. The crisp morning air felt clean. The massive neoclassical estate loomed behind me, but it no longer felt like a monument to my mother's suffocating arrogance. It felt entirely different. It felt like hope. Dozens of news vans and reporters were gathered along the perimeter of the property, cameras rolling as I stepped up to a simple wooden podium. I did not wear a designer gown or flash an ostentatious diamond ring. I wore a sharp, tailored business suit representing Aegis Cyber, not just as a corporate entity, but as an instrument of absolute accountability. Today, Aegis Cyber is officially transferring the deed of this property to the Vanguard Hope Foundation. I announced, my voice carrying clearly over the microphones. This 10,000 square foot estate will no longer serve as a private playground for the corrupt. Effective immediately, Oakwood Mansion is being converted into a fully funded state-of-the-art shelter and rehabilitation center for survivors of domestic abuse and at-risk youth of color in the greater Atlanta area. The reporters erupted into a frenzy of questions, flashbulbs popping wildly. I smiled, feeling a profound, bone-deep satisfaction. The grand ballroom where my mother used to host exclusive, hypocritical charity galas to elevate her social status would now serve as a cafeteria and job training center for the exact people her megachurch had systematically ignored. The pristine guest wings where I was once forbidden to walk would be safe havens for families fleeing violence. It was the ultimate, inescapable poetic justice. I had taken their crown jewel and forged it into a weapon of genuine community healing. Miles away from the manicured lawns of Buckhead, my parents were experiencing a radically different reality. Stripped of their stolen wealth, their corporate assets, and their social standing, Harold and Vivian Thomas had been reduced to nothing. With their bank accounts frozen by federal investigators and facing mountains of civil litigation from furious, defrauded parishioners, they had been forced to move into a cramped, dilapidated two-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. They had no staff, no personal drivers, and no sycophantic followers to stroke their egos. My mother, a woman who once threw violent tantrums over the wrong shade of imported orchids, now had to take public transportation to buy discount groceries with a government assistance card. Her former high society friends had abandoned her, instantly deleting her number and pretending they had never associated with the disgraced family. My father spent his days sitting in a sagging recliner, staring blankly at a small, static-filled television, entirely consumed by the bitter, inescapable realization that his own arrogance had engineered his total destruction. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, suffocating in the mundane, impoverished reality they had once mocked. But their fate was mild compared to the absolute devastation waiting for Chloe and Preston. The federal justice system moved with terrifying speed when presented with Marcus's perfectly packaged dossier of evidence. Preston had tried to negotiate a plea deal by completely turning on Chloe, offering to expose her full involvement in the cyber theft and the forged loan documents. Chloe, operating on pure venomous panic, had attempted to do exactly the same to him. Their mutual betrayals had given the federal prosecutors everything they needed to crush them both. When the judge handed down their sentences in federal court, there were no cameras allowed, but the transcripts painted a vivid picture. Chloe Thomas Sterling, the golden child who had spent her entire life believing she was untouchable, sobbed uncontrollably as the gavel fell. She was stripped of her designer wardrobe, her luxury vehicles, and her country club memberships, trading them all for a standard-issue khaki jumpsuit. The judge sentenced them both to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. She would spend the next decade and a half locked in an 8 by 10 concrete cell, stripped of her vanity, her freedom, and the protective shield of our parents' wealth. I did not attend the sentencing. I had no desire to watch her weep. My focus was no longer on the wreckage of my past, but on the absolute clarity of my future. That evening, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Aegis Cyber Command Center. The Atlanta skyline stretched out before me, a glittering sea of lights against the dark velvet of the night sky. The server farms hummed softly in the background, a steady, comforting rhythm of security and power. My company was thriving. My employees were protected, and the shadow of the Thomas family was permanently erased from my life. I felt a familiar, solid warmth step up behind me. Marcus wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling my back flush against his broad chest. He rested his chin on the top of my head, his presence grounding me completely. I leaned into him, letting the tension of the past 30 days finally drain from my muscles. I covered his large calloused hands with my own, feeling the steady, reliable pulse of the man who had stood beside me against an empire and helped me burn it to the ground. "We did it," Marcus murmured, his deep voice vibrating against my shoulders. "It is finally over." I looked out at the city, a profound, unshakable peace settling over my heart. I had walked into this war expecting a fight for my corporate survival, but I had emerged with something infinitely more valuable. I had secured my absolute freedom. "Family is never defined by blood," I said softly, staring at our reflection in the darkened glass. "It is defined by loyalty, by action, and by unconditional respect." I turned slightly, looking up into Marcus's eyes. They held no judgment, no conditional expectations, only fierce, unwavering devotion. I smiled, a genuine expression of total victory. And the ultimate lesson here is simple. I added, my voice steady and resolved. Never hand an empty box containing a bomb to a woman who knows how to hack an entire empire to the ground. The heavy driving beat of my pulse synchronized with the low hum of the servers as the city lights blurred into a brilliant, undeniable future. The darkness of my past dissolved entirely, leaving nothing but the absolute certainty of my own power.